a hit for Dion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job. All right, right now we're going to go to a song by the Grasshoppers. This one is called Pink Champagne. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Ray Carr Show. On the line with me right now is Mr. Joe Milliken. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ray. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you. And Joe has written a book called Let's Go. It's the Ben Orr story, Benjamin Orr and the Carrs. And Ben has, his real last name is Orzakowski with 11 letters. It's that's why we call him Ben Orr, right?
Well, that's why a lot of people do, I guess.
So, Joe, let me ask you, the book is, I went, a very interesting book, and we could spend about 2, 3, maybe even 4 hours on this thing, but what was the inspiration for you writing this book?
Well, I had been a published writer for about 20 years, but it was all through magazines and newspapers, and I had been contemplating writing my first book for a while. I mostly write about music, so I consider myself a music journalist first. So I was contemplating ideas about my first book, had a short list, hadn't made any decisions yet, though. And one day I was contacted by a Carrs fan out of the blue, and this fan suggested that I write a book about Ben. So that's kind of how it happened. And I will say that, even though the Carrs are one of my sentimental favorite bands, I mean, I was like 13 years old when the first Carrs record came out, so I've always been a longtime fan, and they're one of my favorite bands, but they wouldn't necessarily have been my first choice for a book. So I had this person suggest this to me and not write a book about the Carrs, but specifically about Ben. So I wasn't too sure about that, but I was curious enough to look into it a little bit. And when I did some research about Ben, I realized all these other things about him, his early life in Cleveland and being a young, I don't know, childhood star, if you will, in that city. And I just learned all these things about him that I didn't know. And I asked a couple of my Carrs fans friends if they knew about Ben's early life, and they didn't. So that was the hook, and that's what made me decide to write this biography about Ben.
Joe Milliken, our special guest, the book we're talking about this morning, Let's Go, the Benjamin Orr and the Carrs story. And Ben Orr started with a band called the Cyclones in 1960 to 63, and that was a very interesting band. Ben played drums, is that correct?
He did. He started out as a drummer, took drum lessons as a kid, and you're right, his first band was the Cyclones. He was 13 years old when he started that band. He also played in another band called the Delphis. Actually was in the Delphis the same time as the Cyclones.
Yeah.
And then it progressed to auditioning for the Grasshoppers from there at 16 or 17 years old. And when he auditioned for the Grasshoppers, he had already started learning how to play guitar a little bit, learning some chords. So when he auditioned for the Grasshoppers, he actually auditioned to be the guitarist slash singer slash frontman, if you will. So that's how he kind of progressed from the drums to guitar.
And I believe their manager was Joe Mayer.
The Emperor, yes. Joe was Ben's manager and close friend for many years. Long after Ben became famous, he never forgot where he came from, never forgot his friends, and he remained a lifelong friend with Mr. Mayer.
We played a number of songs by the Grasshoppers this morning. We played The Wasp, Mod Sox, Twin Beat. I mean, I love, this is the kind of stuff that I like to play on my show, and it's, I don't ever hear these songs played anywhere else, and that's kind of like Ben's legacy. And also, how does Carl Maduri fit into all this?
Well, Carl was one of the main producers at the Cleveland Recording Company, which was, I believe, the major recording studio at the time in the city. So when the Grasshoppers decided to go into the studio to cut a couple of songs, Mr. Maduri happened to be the producer there. So they just married from there, and he worked on those songs with the Grasshoppers in the studio. So that's how he kind of hooked up with them.
Yeah, Carl's been on the show a number of times. Very interesting man. He's produced and had a lot to do with a lot of different very popular bands, including Wild Cherry. Yeah,
he was a great guy. I actually interviewed him for the book, so there's quotes from Carl in the book.
Yep, there certainly is. The next band that Ben was involved in was called the Proof Sets and Mixed Emotions, and Ben was lead guitar player, and he also did vocals.
Yes. Yeah, Mixed Emotions, yet another band that he was involved in after the Cyclones and the Delphis. And yeah, he didn't remain in that band for very long. But yeah, just another band that he was involved in early on. Just learning how to be an entertainer and a frontman, although it came pretty natural to Ben. I don't think he needed to learn anything.
Yeah.
That was always his dream, to be a professional musician. That was his lifelong plan, and that's what he always wanted to do. And I think it all just came natural to him.
Now, there's a lot of people that have been rock and roll musicians that I'm sure you've interviewed and run into. To me and to you, Ben is a special guy, but for somebody that isn't that familiar with Benjamin Orr, what is it about him that is alluring, that's interesting? Ben,
he kind of had two personas, and I learned this through all the interviews I did. I interviewed a lot of people over the years who knew him very well, and they said that it was almost like a split personality. He would flip a switch to go on stage, and he became, Benjamin Orr, the rock star. And there was just an aura about him Many people I interviewed said that he was just the kind of guy that he could walk into a room, and whether you knew who he was or not, you were just drawn to him. He was magnetic, and obviously a handsome man and a very talented guy and one of the greatest singers ever in rock. But like I said, he had that persona on stage, but when he left the stage, he turned that switch back off again, and he was not your typical rock star, if you will, off stage. He became a regular guy. He was a hunter and a fisherman, and he was a very private man, and he just lived a different lifestyle off stage. So I always thought it was unique that he could do that he could just go from being a rock star and then coming off stage and just becoming a regular guy and being one of the boys. So I think that's what the alluring thing about him is. There was a certain mystery about him, even though he was a rock star front and center on stage. Because he was a private man off stage, I think it just created a little bit of mystery about him, if you will.
Yeah, it certainly did, because you think of a rock star during that time period, and there was a lot of partying going on. There's a lot of debauchery, and
yes,
there really was. And we can't get into it here this morning, but you kind of get the idea. At least our audience does. But he was able to stay away from most of that.
He was. Again, not your typical rock star. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that he was, a perfect angel in his life. None of us are.
None of us are, right.
But Ben had it under control. He had a close circle of friends, and again, he was just a private guy and wasn't out in the spotlight, in the limelight when he was off stage. So I think that helped him to manage that kind of thing, just to kind of, not have an entourage around him, and, because that could lead to debauchery, like you just said. So I think him being a private man helped a lot in that regard,
Yeah, I'm sure it did. And he also got married to his girlfriend, Chris, and Chris became Chris Orr in 1972, and that may have had something to do with him, being able to keep life in control.
Sure. Having a wife and a life partner, certainly could help with that. They were together for about 10 years or so. But yes, especially early on, I would imagine, and I interviewed Chris too for the book. She has some quotes in there. But you're right. I would imagine, getting married at an early age could definitely help in that regard, kind of keeping you on the straight and narrow, if you will.
Yeah. Joe Milliken, our special guest, it's a book I recommend. It's called Let's Go. It's available. Joe, is it available everywhere on Amazon and all that?
Yeah, it's available for pre-order right now.
Okay.
Barnes & Noble, Amazon. The publisher is Roman and Littlefield. You can pre-order the book at their website. My public relations director, Donna, and I, Donna Neal, also, we recently created a website for the book. Just talks a little bit about the book. We got some pictures up there. So you can also go to, it's pretty simple, benorbook.com, and you can also pre-order it there. But it's not officially on the streets yet. It's going to be released on November 11th, which is 11/11 in honor of Benny 11 Letters.
Wow, very creative, Joe. I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually, Donna and I actually specifically requested that date. They had a date that's set in November that was close, and it kind of dawned on us, hey, can we do this date instead? And they were more than happy to accommodate us. So, yeah, we kind of like that little idea.
Very brilliant, very brilliant. Now, as time goes on, Ben Orr is playing in a number of different bands, and then, when was the moment that the Carrs were really becoming the Carrs?
Wow, that's a good question, because I've done a lot of research on this, obviously, and there was kind of a transitional period. Ben, to do it quickly, Ben met Rick in the Cleveland area, and Rick at one point decided to move to Boston. He figured a great college town, a lot of opportunity to play gigs. So he wanted to go to Boston. Ben wasn't sure at that time. He had recently lost his father, so he was in Cleveland, staying with his mom and helping things settle down in that regard. So he didn't go with Rick right off. Rick was in Boston for a few months. They stayed connected, and Rick would keep calling Ben saying, "You got to come to Boston, you got to come to Boston." And then Ben finally did. They went to Boston. They hooked up with a couple of band members. And this is the early 70s, so the whole Crosby, Stills, and Nash acoustic kind of early 70s thing was going on. So they tried to take advantage of that and had more of an acoustic-sounding group. They were a duo for a while.
The band was Leatherwood, right?
Yep. First it was Leatherwood, and then there was another band called Milkwood. So they did that thing for a while. Then they decided, their roots were really in rock. So they kind of phased back into rock and formed a band called Captain Swing. And that band had a couple of band members come in and out of it. And then eventually the other members of the Carrs ended up in Captain Swing. And that kind of transitioned them from more of an acoustic-sounding thing. And then Captain Swing, I like to try to describe it as sort of a Steely Dan-sounding band. It's got a little bit of a jazzier kind of sound to it. And then that eventually morphed into the Carrs. So it was kind of a transitional thing. It happened over time that they actually kind of turned into what the Carrs would sound like.
Yeah, the Carrs certainly had a very unique sound. And the song "Let's Go" that you chose for the title, why was that the song you used for the title of the book?
Well, first of all, for personal reasons, it was just one of my favorite songs. I mean, the first two Carrs albums, like I mentioned earlier, I was in junior high school when those first two albums exploded onto the scene. So I was really into those first two albums. Candy O is actually my favorite Carrs album.
Yeah, the cover of that, about Candy O, I Need You, remember? That was a good one.
Yeah, and so Let's Go was just one of my favorite songs by the Carrs anyway, and it kind of fit for me because although I said Ben was a private guy, he also liked to go out on the town. If the band was on the road, he wasn't necessarily a sit in your hotel room kind of guy. He wanted to get out there and do some things in the nightlife, baby, if you will.
Joe, let's play a little bit of this so our audience can relate to the song. Let's go. Here we go.
She's my one desire. I don't want to hold her down, don't want to break her crown. When she says, let's go. I like the night.
And I think, Joe, that was a good choice.
So I kind of always envisioned, I could just see Ben, after a gig and, getting changed and just kind of looking around to whoever was with him and just kind of saying, let's go, as in let's get out there and find something to do. I was also told by many people I interviewed that Ben always had something going on. He was always doing something creative. He was not the type to just sit around and sit on his hands and wait for the next gig or whatever. He was always a get up and go, let's do something, I'm never going to sit still kind of person. So it just seems like Let's Go just seemed to fit perfectly for me.
The first song I really remember, and I was just a little bit older than you were, was Let the Good Times Roll and My Best Friend's Girl. Those were the two that just like stuck with me. We used to go ice skating on Friday nights, and I used to go to Brooklyn Ice Rink, and we used to hear those songs all the time. It was like, wow, and it just became the fabric of your youth. You hear something so often that it just becomes like ingrained in your memory.
Oh, yeah. So many songs from those first two albums are, like you just said, ingrained in your youth and your rock and roll memories. They just had so many classic hits. And I think even though those songs are, 40 years ago now, I think they still resonate. They're still all over classic rock radio to this day. And I think one of the things that made the Carrs so great at the beginning was just, like I think you had mentioned it earlier, they just had a unique sound, and nobody sounded like them. They're hard to label. They're a little bit rock. They're a little bit new wave. They're a little bit pop. All those kind of things mixed together. And I think that the songs still resonate today simply because there's still nobody out there that sounds like the Carrs.
Right.
So I think that's part of the reason why it's just ingrained in our memory, because they're just such special songs that are just unique onto themselves.
I would classify the Carrs, if I had to put them in a box, I'd say they were power pop.
Ah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
You're right. See, there's so many different labels you could give to them, and I think, like I said, just because they're such a unique sounding band that a lot of labels fit, no doubt.
Joe Milliken, our special guest. The book is Let's Go. It'll be released on 11/11, so you can pre-order the book. And I've got the book sitting right in front of me. This is a live interview, folks. This is not recorded. If you have a question about Ben Orr, you can call us at 216-687-3515. Share something about Ben's life that we may not know, that we would like to know, that you learned about his life during the interviews.
Something about Ben that you would want to know. Well, I kind of touched upon it already. Just the simple fact that he wasn't an extravagant rock star, even though he looked it and played the part. He just was a normal guy. He was a regular guy. After the Carrs broke up, and he lived on the outskirts of Boston, and after the Carrs broke up, he actually sold his house and moved to Vermont, where I live. And he actually lived about an hour or so north of me. And he wanted to kind of get away from the city, and he wanted to, Vermont is a much more peaceful, quiet lifestyle. And like I said, he was a hunter and a fisherman, and he loved being in the woods, and he loved nature. So you see Ben on stage, and, you have this extravagant rock star dressed to the nines and immaculate basses and just being a rock star. But off stage, like I said, it was totally different. He wore regular clothes and just looked like a normal guy. And I think that might be something that would surprise people, because they just, they look at him the way he was on stage, and he was just a different person than that off stage. Like I said, he flipped the switch to be a rock star, and then when the rock star part was over, he flipped the switch back off and became a very normal, quiet kind of guy.
It was interesting. You mentioned Vermont. Montpelier, Vermont is the capital city, and that's the only capital city in the country that doesn't have a McDonald's, which is interesting.
I did not know that.
Well, I was reading that the other day. I thought it was kind of interesting. But back to your book. On page 129, it says, Ben was mesmerized by the voice of Roy Orbison, as many of us are.
Yeah. A little story about that. I also interviewed Diane Gray Page, who was Ben's partner for several years, and they also collaborated together on Ben's solo album, The Lace. So I interviewed her, and one of the things she told me was that Ben went out of his way to want to meet Roy Orbison and see him in concert, and went backstage to meet him. And something that stands out to me is she told me that Ben never really understood why people wanted autographs. I mean, he was happy to give autographs, and I've had other people I've interviewed tell me that if there were 500 people around him who needed an autograph, he would sign every last one of them. But he never really understood that concept. He wondered why would people want my autograph? But she told me that when he met Roy Orbison, he wanted his autograph. She said he wanted to meet him, and she also said that he told Roy that he was one of his favorite voices, and when Roy would hit those high notes, the hair on the back of his neck would stand up. So he really had an affection for Roy and his kind of vocals, and so much so that he wanted the man's autograph.
You know, that's interesting because there's a lot. I feel the same way about autographs. I mean, but sometimes I think there's that person that you want a piece of that person, like on a piece of paper or a record or whatever, that you can look at that and go, God, he really signed that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not speaking for myself. I am a fanboy. I am a rock music fan first and foremost, and I have several autographs. So yeah, I wasn't referring to me. I love to have autographs. When I go to shows and I get to maybe somehow get to rub elbows with a musician, I always have a copy of my CD and a Sharpie ready to go. I love to get autographs, and I always enjoyed that. So you're right. It's like having a piece of them, for sure.
I noticed one of the people that wrote something very positive about the book, and I totally agree with this, Pat Travers, who did the song Boom Boom, Out Go the Lights. We played the original version by Little Walter this morning, but
cool.
Pat Travers is a great rocker, and he really, really loved the book and how you were able to lift the veil of the ice-cool demeanor of Ben Orr. I like how that is because we only know that part of him. That's why that you're on the air here with us now talking about that. Very interesting.
Yeah, Pat Travers was in a band with Ben. He was only in the band for a short period of time, but the last band that Ben was in his life was a band called Big People. And Pat was a part of that band for a little while. And the funny thing is, it was kind of a super group, if you will. Liberty DeVito, Billy Joel's drummer, was the drummer.
Uh-huh.
And Derek St. Holmes from Ted Nugent's band was one of the guitar players, and Jeff Carlisi from 38 Special was one of the guitar players, and of course Pat. So here you have all these guys that they're already rock stars in their own right. Million-selling albums, world tours, you name it. And they all told me that when they decided to call Ben to see if he wanted to join their group because they needed a bass player and they needed a great singer, that when Ben agreed to come down and hang with these guys to see if it was going to be a fit, they all told me that when Ben walked in the room, they were all in awe of him. So here is a band of rock stars in their own right looking at Ben like, oh my God, I'm in the same room with Ben Orr.
Wow.
So yeah, I thought that was unique that here we are, all these guys that are rock stars in their own right, still looked up to Ben like they were just a fan like you or I, and admired him. And so yeah, he affected everybody that was in his presence.
All right, Joe, we're going to go to a call right now. We have time for at least one call. Caller, you're on the radio.
Hey. I was just curious how Ben became the bass player for the Carrs. Was it just somebody needed to be the bass player, or had he played bass in any other bands before that? And I'll hang up and listen.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Ben was a multi-instrumentalist. We told you he started as a drummer at 13. When he joined the Grasshoppers at 16, he was the guitar player. Ben could play anything. And through the years, he sort of would take the role of whatever the band needed at the time. I mentioned Captain Swing before they became the Carrs. He didn't play any instruments at that point. He was just the front man and the singer because they had another bass player. So Ben was the kind of guy that could just, and it takes immense talent to be able to do this, that he could just conform to whatever his band needed. So as Captain Swing turned into the Carrs, Rick wanted him to play bass again, and that's when I think Leatherwood might have been the first band that he actually picked up a bass. So it's not like he had never played the bass before with the Carrs, but that's kind of how it happened. The bass player they had at the time was kind of more of a virtuoso player, and Rick is a very minimalist kind of guy and likes that kind of songwriting. So he wanted more of a straight-up, sit-in-the-pocket kind of bass player, if you will. And that's exactly what Ben was. So, yeah, that's how it kind of happened. They wanted Ben to pick up the bass again, and it just kind of happened that way.
Joe, we have time for one more, and then we got to kind of sail off into the sunset. Hey, John, how you doing?
Hey, Ray. I wanted to share this with you guys. This story is it's really interesting because I met him one day. We were at a record convention out by Chevy Boulevard, and somebody come in and goes, "There's this big white limo outside." So Ben Orr walks out, and he comes into the record convention, and he's got a white suit on and a denim shirt. And he just walks in, and it was like this big glow around him. I said to my friend, I said, "Is that guy always in the spotlight? What the heck?" And it was his aura, man. That guy was very magnetic. And he sat in that record convention and signed about 500 autographs. He was there over an hour, and he would just penner. And my friend was sitting next to him. He was talking to him. He goes, "No," he goes, "sit down." And he's talking to him while he's autographing, and this guy was completely mesmerized by him. You know, one of my best friends. And I talked to him for a minute, and he goes, "What's your favorite song?" I said, "I like You're All I've Got Tonight." He goes, "Oh, yeah." He goes, "That was all our songs were connecting with the people." I said, "Well, can you tell that singer to acknowledge the audience? They never said hello. They never said thank you. They just played their songs and left. I saw him about 6 times." I said, "I never seen so much." He goes, "Well, that's Rick." I'm like, "Oh, my God."
Thanks, John.
Okay.
A little story.
Yeah. John's a loyal listener. He's seen every band that's ever come through this town in the last 50 years, and he's amazing. Joe, once again, the book is called Let's Go, the Benjamin Orr story. It's going to be available November 11th, because Ben's last name is Orzechowski, which has 11 letters. And I just think it's very appropriate. Joe, I'd like to talk to you again at length, and this is a very interesting interview, and I really, really appreciate your time. You're a wonderful guest.
Well, I really appreciate you having me. I love Cleveland, and Ben loved Cleveland. And I want to let the Cleveland fans know that I plan on coming to Cleveland sometime in November, maybe early December. I want to have my initial book launching in Cleveland. It's appropriate that I do it in Ben's hometown. So that is in the works, and as it comes closer and the book comes out, I'd love to talk to you again. Anytime you want to talk to me, I'll be here and ready.
Joe, you can do it right. You can launch the book right on this program.
Well, hey, I'd love to come visit you when we're in town. I'll be in town for a few days, so maybe we can line it up where I can come and shake your hand and meet you face to face, sir.
Joe, we will do that, and I really thank you.
Thanks a lot, and thanks to all the Cleveland fans for all their support, and I hope this book meets everyone's expectations.
I'm sure it will. You have a wonderful day, Joe.
You too. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Joe Milliken, folks. We're going to go right now to Adam Sharp on our next interview, but as we transition, let's hear some more about the Carrs.
Tonight, I need you. Tonight.